Good afternoon, everybody. It is about 4 p.m. Eastern on January 6th, 2026. This Tuesday, doing what's become sort of an annual thing, doing a brief recap of everything that transpired, what went down yesterday on the NFL's Black Monday, the annual day of the year following the last week of the regular season, in which most teams make their decisions as to whether or not they will retain coaches and front office executives for the following season, and just sharing some of the updates that have transpired, both with the changes that have been made thus far, changes that may still be made, as well as the directions in which the teams that have made changes are looking to go. So, with that being said, I'll jump right into it. It's going to be relatively quick and straightforward and to the point, but just kind of running through some of what's gone down to get everybody in the loop. So the head coaching changes. First head coaching change that was made was, well, actually, technically speaking, the first two head coaching changes that were made were the New York Giants and the Tennessee Titans. Those happened in season. Those teams obviously got a head start on their list compilations, and those teams have already made several requests each to candidates they will be interviewing. The known scheduled interview, excuse me, thus far on the docket for the Tennessee Titans is former head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, Raheem Morris, who was let go. He was the first coach let go on Sunday after games concluded, and that interview has been scheduled already. Additionally, requests are out for the following candidates: both the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, respectively, Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo. They both have requests out from the Titans to interview them. The Colts have received a request to interview defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, and the Denver Broncos have received a request for the Titans to interview defensive coordinator Vance Joseph. Now, I will say, right now, it is easiest for teams to have these dialogues and discussions with unemployed coaches, actively unemployed coaches. That can be a coach who didn't have a job this season. That can be a coach who's already been fired. But it does put coaches behind the eight ball a little bit if they're still in the playoff hunt, as the guys that I just mentioned, Matt Nagy, Steve Spagnuolo, Lou Anarumo, and Vance Joe. Excuse me. Those three and Vance Joseph are currently under coaching or currently under current coaching contracts. Excuse me. I misspoke there for a moment. To clarify, Vance Joseph is the only one who currently is behind the eight ball of those four, because he's the only one actively under a control of a team that's currently in the playoffs. So let me just make that a little bit clearer. It's different if you're under contract with a team that has been eliminated from the playoffs versus if you're under contract with a team that's still in the playoffs. The team that's still in the playoffs being the Denver Broncos. Of those three teams that I mentioned, Vance Joseph a little bit more behind the eight ball than the others. Nagy, Spagnuolo, and Anarumo are a little bit of a different story because they are not coaching in the playoffs. But it's unemployed coaches who have the easiest path right now toward a job. And the reason for this is because scheduling comes into play. The scheduling has become more rigorous and more rigid in terms of when coaches can get interviewed by teams that are seeking to hire them for head coaching positions. So there is an immediate possibility for someone like another coach that has been hired, or another coach that has recently been fired, rather, Kevin Stefanski from the Cleveland Browns. He is under less of a strain in terms of his the constraint in terms of his when he can schedule interviews, because he's not currently employed by an NFL team at all. Now, to do this in a little bit more of a concise manner, I'll just run down the teams that have moved off their head coaches. In season, it was the Titans and the Giants. And since the end of the season, it was the Falcons, then it was the Cleveland Browns, then it was the Las Vegas Raiders, then it was the the Arizona Cardinals. Those are the teams that have created vacancies thus far, respectively, putting both Brian Callahan and Brian Dable, and then in the time since the season concluded, putting Raheem Morris and Kevin Stefanski and Pete Carroll and then Jonathan Gannon out of jobs. So that's where we're at right now in terms of the changes that have been made. Now, going to the rest of the teams in terms of the interview requests that have been made thus far and that have been confirmed. We started with the Titans, moving to the Giants, which is the other team that had a little bit of an advantage. The one that has been confirmed as of these updates becoming official is Lou Anarumo. We just talked about him as the Colts defensive coordinator. Other names that have been floated as serious candidates include Mike McCarthy, Antonio Pierce, Vance Joseph, Mike Kafka. Kafka took over as the interim head coach after the firing of Brian Dable. Chris Shula with the Rams, Jesse Minter with the Chargers, Jeff Hafley with the Packers, Matt Burke with the Texans, Clint Kubiak with the Seahawks, Cliff Kingsbury with the Commanders, Ajiro Evero with the Panthers. Stay with me here, I'm almost done. Josh McCown with the Vikings, Grant Udinsky with the Jaguars, and then Kevin Stefanski, the aforementioned former Browns head coach. So that concludes those names. Now moving on to the other lists, which are decidedly shorter because they've had much less time. The Falcons have requests into Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver and Saints offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, also believed to be interested in interviewing Kevin Stefanski. And then moving on to the Raiders, the one known candidate for that position right now is Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Also has received interest from the Dallas Cowboys to potentially fill their now vacant defensive coordinator position as they parted ways with Matt Eberflus this morning. So that brings that up to the latest. And then the last one, we don't have anything that's been particularly confirmed with regard to the Cardinals yet because they are the most recent vacancy created. That didn't happen until later yesterday. The Cleveland Browns, to wrap this up, their one request that has been documented thus far, Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken. That is the one candidate known there thus far. Now, there are also two vacancies in leading front offices in football operations. Those candidates have been named as of yesterday. The Dolphins, they put forth it was either 6 or 7 names that include Packers VP of Player Personnel John Eric Sullivan, Eagles Assistant General Manager Alec Hollaby, 3 people from the 49ers, their VP of Player Personnel GM Tariq Ahmad, their Assistant GM RJ Gillen, and their Director of Scouting and Football Operations Josh Williams. The last couple are Rams Assistant GM John McKay and Chargers Assistant GM Chad Alexander. So those are the names to keep an eye on for the Miami Dolphins. There are several names that have been put out from the Falcons as well. However, the one to keep the sharpest eye on with regard to potentially finalizing a deal to be the new president of football operations there is former quarterback Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan was almost immediately when they moved off of Terry Fontenot on Sunday, Matt Ryan almost immediately became a heavily rumored name that I speculated about, a name that multiple other people speculated about. And it does appear that he is fast-track moving toward the position to be the new president of football operations. One of the things that was a brief, I wouldn't say a holdup, but one of the things that had to be ironed out in advance was how that would impact his projected time duties and commitments with broadcasting and radio, TV / this coming year. but original reports had it that it would be somewhat of a Tom Brady situation. But because this is expected to be a president of football operations, not a minority owner position, that would come with substantially more day-to-day commitment. It is not believed that he is going to be able to have a position where he will be allowed to juxtapose his president of football operations role with the Atlanta Falcons, if that gets done, with doing media. So it is expected that he's going to have to choose one or the other. And as of right now, it does appear he will decide to prioritize the job leading the Atlanta Falcons football operations. So that is something to keep an eye on there. He's been considered the front runner really since it was first floated about 48 hours ago, a little less than 48 hours ago. But that is how the cookie is crumbling on that one. Now, and just to go back, I'll provide a little more context on the coaching interview calendar, which I alluded to earlier on in the episode, the news blast, whatever you want to call this. I'll just add a little bit of more context as to when candidates can be interviewed versus not. So as of today, Tuesday, January 6th, interviews can begin with candidates whose teams did not make the playoffs or have first-round byes if the interviewing club played on Saturday. So this includes, I mentioned some of the teams that includes teams like the Chiefs, teams like I'm trying to remember a couple of the other teams that came up when I was talking about that. I believe that the Dolphins were one of the teams that I mentioned. I believe that the Colts were another team that I mentioned. So those are teams that are impacted there. Tomorrow, teams can interviews can begin with candidates whose teams did not make the playoffs or have first-round byes if the interviewing club played on Sunday. So that would be, so that would begin affect the teams that played on Sunday as opposed to the teams that play on Saturday, which would make sense given the 1 day apart. Tuesday, January 13th, a week from today, is when head coaching interviews can begin with candidates who did coach in Saturday or Sunday's wildcard games. So those games are coming up this coming weekend. Head coaching interviews can begin with candidates who coached in those games on Saturday or Sunday. Now, there is a Monday wildcard game that is scheduled as well for the 12th, and the coaches who coached in that game can begin interviewing on Wednesday, January 14th. So there are a few coaches who are going to have to wait quite a bit for their first opportunity to interview. And those coaches, I'm going to pull up those names right now. But in general, those would be coaches who are in the Houston Texans organization or the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. So either one of those teams, if there's, for example, if someone wants to interview an Arthur Smith, for example, who's with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they will have to wait until at least January 14th to do so. Someone wants to interview the Houston Texans. If they want to interview somebody on the staff of D'Amico Ryans, they have to wait until January 14th. So that's a little bit of clarity on that schedule earlier. I know I kind of gave a bit of a rough explanation of that earlier on, but hopefully that clears up some questions. If anybody had any, or if any existed after the way that I explained it originally. So that's coming up, and that's kind of the information that had been coming out. Actually, just since I went live, there have been two interview requests put out by the Arizona Cardinals, according to multiple people, including NFL Network and Sports Illustrated. The Cardinals have requested interviews with 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. In juxtaposition with what I just mentioned about the interviewing schedule, they play on Sunday for the wild card, and I believe that means that he would be first available to interview on the 13th. And then the other name that they've requested is Anthony Weaver, who is the defensive coordinator of the Dolphins. They are not in the playoffs, so he can interview, I'm pretty sure, as soon as today. Now, that being said, just because they can interview as soon as these dates are provided doesn't mean that they will. I know Kevin Stefanski can interview at any time, and I know he's got 4 interviews lined up. Those are going to be playing out over the next week. I know that I think it was the Titans one doesn't happen until Saturday. So just because these are when these things become possible doesn't mean that automatically that's when those interviews will occur. So I'll give you Stefanski's interview schedule right away because I know that he was automatically given 3 or I think even 4 interviews scheduled. So I'm going to see if I can get those dates for you because I know that because he's probably considered the most high in demand of those uh, candidates. Um, but as of right now, so at this point, I think that there's been 4 so far, but at this point there was 3 uh, interviews scheduled for Stefanski. But I'm trying to get the actual dates of those. I'm trying to get these in real time. So bear with me for just a moment as I look to put this together. But I know, yeah, the Titans one I know is Saturday. Perhaps the other 2 have not yet been scheduled, but I do know that there was at least 3, if not 4 teams that have scheduled interviews with him, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to come. But yeah, and then now I'll wrap this up with going through the decisions that were made and just kind of my quick thoughts on each of them. The decision to not, I'm sorry, the decision to move on from Brian Callahan, I think is one that made a lot of sense. And I know this goes back to the middle of the season, but just to talk about him real quick, the decision to move on from Brian Callahan, I think, made a lot of sense to most people. He just looked over his head. He did not appear to be the most comfortable in front of the mic, in front of the podium. There was definitely some clashing that was going on behind the scenes. A lot of people didn't think that he handled the Will Levis and Malik Willis developments or struggles particularly well. So it was pretty apparent that those things were going to be turned over at some point. Now, Mike McCoy had taken over as the interim head coach. I'm guessing, is going to get. It's pretty standard to interview interim guys to be for the long term. It's kind of a formality. It's very rare that those things actually manifest themselves. The one time that I can think of in recent memory where it did was Antonio Pierce in I think it was Antonio Pierce. Was it? It was either Pierce or Basacha. It was one of the two with the Raiders. But either way, it was it was the Las Vegas Raiders. I know that much. But it's very rare, increasingly rare for that to happen. It was much more common in the past than it has been recently. So I was not surprised by that one. The Giants definitely was more surprised by the Brian Dable thing, especially because I expected Joe Shane to be out before Brian Dable would. Joe Shane has been told he will return for next season, so he is going to lead the decision or the excuse me the process to decide on the next head coach for the New York Giants. I'm not going to talk about this one too much because there is a Giants show coming up in a couple of hours at 7 p.m. Eastern at which they will. I mean, it's the Giants show. They will cover it much more in depth than I will, and you guys should definitely check that out. They always have really good content. But I will say that that one did surprise me more. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Brian Dable gets head coaching interviews or at least an OC job somewhere this cycle. I think that's widely believed to be a strong possibility, if not a likelihood. So those things are at play there. I think I think Kafka did. I mean, about as much as he could have in some respects. I mean, he took over a banged up team. He took over a team that had seen, kept seeing, Scatterbo was getting banged up. Jackson Dart felt like every 15 minutes was having a concussion scare. Malik Neighbors had gone down early in the season. So there was just not much with Mike Kafka to work with there. So I don't think this is the best lens through which to view his capability as a head coach eventually. I don't think he gets a job from right off the rip after what he did as the interim head coach in New York. But I don't think that this also was the best lens through which to be able to view his potential to fill that role down the road. So some of the other ones, Cardinals, I was honestly more surprised when I heard that the Cardinals were potentially not going to move off of John Gannon. Now, obviously, if you've watched What's the Scoop or even going back to K&K, I have my personal thoughts about Jonathan Gannon, but keeping my subjectivity out of this, which obviously views him in an extremely negative light because I think what he did in 2023 in his former job, I think was disgraceful. But I think that he was hardly at the number one spot of most culpability for the downturn of the Cardinals recently. I think that there was just the Kyler Murray situation has just been so weird for so long. Um, he at one point it's a question about his injuries. At one point it's a question about his commitment or his love for the game. At one point it's a question about his ability. At one point it's a question about this, that, or the other. It just it feels like there's just always so much drama going on in Arizona, and it just feels like it needed to be wiped clean. Now again, the owner, Mike Bidwell, does not have the greatest reputation among owners. In fact, he has one of the worst. If you get the opinions from players regularly when the NFLPA does their uh, uh, what's the word? Um, Anonymous evaluations, I guess, of different clubs and how they're run annually. He's almost either at the bottom or near the bottom when it comes to ownership. So they are not well regarded in terms of their higher end structure. They kind of dodge the scrutiny about it for most of the time because their record is not terrible. But eventually, I think it's going to be hard for him to keep just dodging the light of scrutiny about it. But I think this was a classic scapegoating move where I think that I think that Jonathan Gannon is definitely good enough to get at least a defensive coordinator job again somewhere. But I think he was an easy one to take the fall here. I don't expect Kyler Murray to be back in Arizona next season. But in terms of where I think that they should go with this, hearing Robert Saleh's name really intrigues me. He instantly, of these three names, Robert Saleh, Vance Joseph, and Anthony Weaver, Saleh instantly becomes the most interesting to me, particularly if he's a coordinator paired with whoever they draft at quarterback, presumably. But just the fact that Jacoby Brissett at times was outperforming Kyler Murray and by a decent margin is not good. So, and that's full respect to Jacoby Brissett because I think he's one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. But when you had a consensus or who was considered a consensus number one overall QB in Kyler Murray for a while, that shouldn't be the case. Anthony Weaver has been in head coaching rumors for a while. Vance Joseph did a hell of a job this year with the Bronco defense. But again, I just think Robert Saleh I think he got a raw deal in New York. I mean, everyone gets a raw deal in New York, but I think he did in particular. I think that what happened on the defensive side in Arizona this year, in San Francisco this year, should not in any way be an indictment on him as a defensive coach. The team had like two defensive players that you could trust, and one of them was Fred Warner, who was out a good chunk of the season, and the other one was Bryce Huff, and then there was one other guy whose name's escaping me, who you could kind of rely on a good amount of the time. But there's just I would be shocked if they advance this week playing the Eagles. I know that the Eagles have had kind of a sputtery year on offense, thanks in no small part to their offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo. But just the fact that I think that between these three, the easy pick to me of these three would be Robert Saleh. But again, I'm not in the interview room, so we'll see where they go. The next one, the Atlanta Falcons. This one was probably the most surprising to me of the ones I've discussed thus far. Not in particular because I don't see why they did it, but I thought that Raheem Morris, some of the games they won this year, some of the times I saw them punch above their weight class in terms of what their roster allowed them to do and the games they were able to win. I just thought that he had earned himself enough goodwill to at least get the beginning of next season. But, the fact is some of those games, their best play at times came up when the games or the season or both at times would just be so imbalanced already against them that it kind of was low leverage by that point, or at least not high leverage. And that a lot of the scrutiny around him came from perception that his teams were not successful in high leverage situations. That being said, I think that he was not placed in a great situation by having to navigate the headache between the quarterback situation with Kirk Cousins and then Michael Penix. I think a lot of people hoped Michael Penix would be better than he was. I was one of them. Did not happen, or at least hasn't happened thus far, and he gets hurt every 5 minutes. So that is another thing that will have to be navigated. And obviously, the first of these organizations that I have mentioned thus far to move off not only their head coach, but their general manager as well. Terry Fontenot also went out the door as well. Falcons requests thus far that are known are Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints, and the aforementioned Anthony Weaver, D coordinator for the Dolphins. Both those guys not on current playoff teams. Both those guys can interview at any time. Kevin Stefanski is also rumored to be a fit there. I do not know if this is something where they have an interview scheduled as of yet. I just know that they are. I know that they have had interest. But if that interview gets scheduled, of these three, I think he makes the most sense. They have too much offensive personnel. I know that they're going to potentially lose Kyle Pitts to free agency. In my vantage point, knowing how Stefanski has used his tight ends in the past, if you have any chance of bringing back Kyle Pitts, if you choose to do so, if Matt Ryan takes over and he chooses to do so, I think Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski automatically makes them look like a team that at least can put together a viable offense more quickly. If you really believe that, the trends in recent years are that you can do these turnarounds more quickly. Because keep in mind also, the Falcons do not presently have a first round draft pick. So there's that difficulty as well that they have to overcome. So they also just restructured the Kirk Cousins contract, which is going to allow them to kind of nix that deal by no later than, I believe it was March 13th. Don't rule out them potentially coming to a reworked deal to keep him longer than that. But as of right now, they've made it so that they can get out under that deal at the beginning of the league year. And I'm sure that whoever they bring in as the head coach will have heavy impact in that. My personal choice of those three would be Stefanski. And then finally, speaking of Stefanski, we've got the team that I'm sorry, not finally. We got one more team after this, but that will segue me into the team that let go of Stefanski 2 days ago, or no, it was yesterday. Excuse me, for reasons that I don't understand at all. Cleveland, once again, the hell are you doing? You have a 2-time head coach of the year. Both of those awards were won with your organization. He got some of the best results out of your teams, not just your offense, but your whole team, that you've had in 3 decades since you came back into the league in 99 after the infamous relocation to Baltimore in 1996 under Art Modell. How the hell do you look at this season and think that you would have been better with that team under a different coach? Moreover, does it not concern you at all? Jimmy Haslam in particular, does it not concern you at all? Does it not jive anything in your brain that the coach that you just fired as the Cleveland Browns owner, knowing you're the Cleveland Browns owner, the most maligned owner in the NFL since Dan Snyder was ousted, knowing that's your position right now, and knowing that you had a glimmer of hope for about 5 minutes and then fell right back into normal Browns territory over the past season, knowing that that's your situation, do you think it's a great look that you fire a head coach who within 24 hours has between 3 and 4 teams already looking to hire him or interview him to potentially hire him as their next head coach? No other team that fired their head coach, not John Gannon with the Cardinals, not Raheem Morris with the Falcons, not Brian Daboll with the Giants, not Pete Carroll with the Raiders, not Brian Callahan with the Titans. None of these guys have 4 teams or more looking to interview their former head coach. You do. And you choose to let him go because you think, oh, there's somebody else out there we can get that's better. I don't see anybody else, especially nobody who just got fired, getting interviews by almost every other team that needs a head coach. It's a deja vu of the 4 years ago when you needed an adult in the room, so you moved off Baker Mayfield to commit a $230 million contract fully guaranteed to Deshaun Watson, who at no point in the past 3 years was the best quarterback on your roster, and he was the most expensive quarterback in the whole league. And he was never the best on your own roster. It dumbass. Anyway, suffice it to say, I do not agree with the decision to move off of Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland. And this just makes it worse. Their number one candidate that they've requested was offensive coordinator for the Ravens, Todd Monken. What on God's green earth are you looking at with the Ravens offense this year and saying, we need this guy not only leading our offense, but leading our whole organization? What is it that you're looking at and seeing that? Their offense has not been the same that it was under Greg Roman since Todd Monken took over. And that's when they've been healthy. Why? Help me understand this. If I go and I look into Todd Monken right now, because I'm trying to remember where it was that Todd Monken was before he was in Baltimore. I know he was at college at one point. Trying to think, because I know he was with Georgia at some point. Okay, it was when he was with Georgia. Okay. So he was the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach in Georgia for 3 seasons before he went to Baltimore. Before he was there, he was in Cleveland as the offensive coordinator. As the offensive coordinator under Freddie Kitchens, who somehow, of all the horrible head coaching hires you've made in the last 20 years, may be the worst. I'm not even a Browns fan. And how are you this incompetent? This is almost a form of weaponized incompetence at this point, because it genuinely stresses me out watching this as somebody who followed the Browns a good amount growing up because of my grandfather, God rest his soul, who was a lifelong Browns fan going back to, I think it was 1965 or even before. I've seen plenty of teams who were at the bottom of the barrel in the NFL in the last 15 years at some point at least have a glimmer of success at or near the top for even a brief minute. They find a way to get it right. They get the coach right, they get the GM right, they get the quarterback right, they get something right. You guys did it at both coach and quarterback, and I still like your general manager, Andrew Berry. You guys did it all 3 at one point. And you decided to piss in the face of your fans in all three ways. What kind of ego have you built up to think that you know better than the people who have actually brought you success in the organization? Is it Pilot Flying J? Because it doesn't look like that's gone too well the last past decade either. I can go and check your bio and see what's going on over there too. I don't get it. I do not get this organization at all. I don't get it from a Haslam standpoint. And I was really nervous when Paul DePodesta left in the middle of the season to go take over the general manager position of the Colorado Rockies in Major League Baseball, because he was a big advocate for Kevin Stefanski. And I remember saying, as soon as he left to go into Colorado, that my belief that Stefanski was staying after this season changed significantly after he left. Because DePodesta was one of the smartest guys in that organization. And I think he's a really good hire for the Colorado Rockies. I don't know if it's going to work like holistically, but I know he was a damn good hire for the Colorado Rockies. And now he was a damn good hire for you guys when you had him. And I know it wasn't your fault that he left to go to the Rockies, because, I mean, people leave to go to different jobs to have new experiences or new challenges or whatever it is. It's not always just about better money or whatever. So that I can't blame anybody in Cleveland for that. But typically when you get what's the so-called brain drain, where the intelligent people from your business or your company or your team or your franchise go elsewhere, typically if they left a positive impact on you, which DePodesta did by any measurement, evaluation, whatever you want to say, typically you want to keep incorporating that. Even if they're no longer there, typically you want to keep incorporating those good ideas. I'm going to move on and talk about the Raiders before this completely just makes me lose my mind. Tune in on Thursday night for What's the Scoop for more of this and more of my opinions on this. because I have plenty more to say. Uh, First, what's the scoop of the year? Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. Myself, my co-host Brandon Furtado, and our newest co-host, also being the host on Millions of Football After Hours, our longtime friend Rob Jalowski. And to wrap it all up really quick, because it's already gone longer than I expected, the two coaches, coaching candidates for the Raiders. I can't even talk. I'm so annoyed after what I was just talking about. Raiders have interest in defensive coordinator for the Broncos, Vance Joseph. They've already requested him. Again, an example of somebody who's going to be delayed in his ability to interview because of coaching in the playoffs. Pardon me. Sorry, they have a first round bye. And they played on, I don't remember which day it was. They played on either Saturday or Sunday of this week, though. So because they have first round bye for having the number one overall seed, or the number one conference seed, rather, he can interview as soon as either today or tomorrow. I would just depend on what day they, in fact, let me double check right now what day they played. They played on Sunday, okay, so he can interview starting tomorrow. So it wouldn't be surprised to me if the Raiders jumped on that as quickly as possible, because they're definitely going to have competition for him. And then the other one, my computer's frozen right now, but I remember saying that the other one was Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. And this is why I think that it's kind of unlikely that he'll end up, even though he's being targeted there, why I think it's unlikely he'll end up in Dallas as the defensive coordinator, because he's got several teams looking at him as a head coach. I just can't see him passing on that to be a defensive coordinator elsewhere on a team that frankly doesn't have as good of a defense as Minnesota does. And I think that wraps up everything in terms of looking at, my thoughts on this one. I kind of talked about this already the other day on FAH, but for those who didn't see the FAH episode, this I'm kind of in the middle on this one, because obviously at bare minimum, there's shock value to seeing a guy like Pete Carroll, a longtime coaching legend, and arguably one of the most successful coaches to succeed at both college and pro in recent memory. But it's just gotten so weird. It got weird toward the end of his time in Seattle, both with him and Russell Wilson. People wanted to blame one or the other. I think both were somewhat in culpability there. And then you see what happened this year in Vegas. And I said this on FAH. I almost wonder if they, in retrospect, weren't better off just making Chip Kelly the head coach. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but I never saw Chip Kelly trying to hire his kids and his family for influential assistant positions. I never saw Chip Kelly trying to cram his styles on coaches. You can feel differently about the players, but on coaches who weren't accustomed to those philosophies. Like, he at least brought in, like, to almost to a fault, he brought in people in Philly who at least shared his vision. You take Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly, that's not a battle of the egos that I think either one is going to have what's the word? Satisfying, is going to be satisfied with the outcome. That being said, the early reports are, one, that Tom Brady's going to have a more heavy influence on the football operation this time around. We'll see what that leads to. The early reports were that Brian Flores was a head coaching target, tying with Brian Dable as the OC. We'll see how that goes. If that's the case, I didn't see his name. I didn't see Dable's name come up, but this is mostly showing up as head coaches anyways. And I would probably say I would prefer Flores over Joseph. I respect Joseph, and I think he's a better coach and a better head coaching candidate than I think he's getting credit for at times. But just knowing how much stability that organization needs right now, I feel like Flores is somebody that I would just trust more, I guess. But I do like Joseph more than others do, so I don't think that there's that much of a gap between Flores and Joseph than others might say. So to wrap that up, in terms of my choices for each one, I didn't even pick one for Cleveland because they only have Todd Monken listed, and don't even get me started on that again. Cardinals would be Rob Saleh. Falcons would be Kevin Stefanski. Giants, I might not have chosen one for the Giants either. Um, People are going to think I'm crazy for this, but I genuinely think Antonio Pierce deserves another chance. And knowing that he was on here, he hasn't gotten a request yet, but I genuinely think he deserves another chance. Of the ones getting the request, Joseph and Anarumo, I'd lean toward Joseph there just because he's got the coaching experience at the higher levels. And also just because I don't like getting too caught up in how good or bad a defense was, but the Colts defense was just so hard to watch this year. So yeah, call it either Pierce or Joseph for me for the Giants. Raiders, I'll go either one, but I'll say Flores just because I already said Joseph as part of the ones for the Giants. And then Titans. I know people have a really polarized opinion of him. I think Cliff Kingsbury, who's showing up here, I'm not actually in retrospect, I'm not even sure if I went through all the Titans guys. No, I went through the ones that were requested and scheduled. The ones that are also showing up but not with requested or scheduled are Stefanski, McCarthy, and Kingsbury. I actually kind of like Kingsbury as a fit there, just because they so badly need to really get that offense like sound. And I like Kingsbury at least as an offensive mind. If he brings in a really solid defensive mind, like um, if he can make it, if he can get himself a really good defensive coordinator, like a Vic Fangio type that you know is not going to leave for a head coaching job a year later, then all of a sudden I think that could be interesting. Um, yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts there. These were meant to be quick thoughts. It ended up going 42 minutes. My apologies. Thanks to those who stayed on the whole time. But yeah, that's just kind of a brief rundown of what I've got in terms of my quick reactions to the Black Monday saga in this year's NFL. And as I said before, tune in on Thursday night to hear the rest of my thoughts, joined by my two trusty co-hosts, Brandon Furtado and our new co-host, the mastermind behind Football After Hours on Millions, Mr. Robert Shagalowski. And I will see y'all then. And thanks again. Enjoy the playoffs, everybody. Peace out.